I'd like to welcome everyone to our Special Education Advisory Committee meeting of May 23rd, 2024. I will start off with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of Mississauga of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewa of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, live, and learn. This statement was co-created in partnership with the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and the Chippewas of Georgina Island. I would also like to state the Indigenous Rights and Human Rights Statement. The Durham District School Board recognizes Indigenous rights are distinct. In the exercise of those rights, Indigenous staff and students shall not be subjected to actions with the aim or effect of depriving these distinct rights. The Durham District School Board is committed to providing learning and working environments that center human rights and equity and are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from all forms of discrimination, oppression, harassment, and harm. Okay, we will move on to roll call. Tara Kelly, Durham Down Syndrome Association.
Allison Amer, Easter Seals.
Kelly Miller, trustee of HX.
Tracy Running, the secretary, DSWAP.
Elizabeth Daniel, member at large.
Sensor Renette Barrett, Autism Ontario.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Connor Jameson, Inclusive Student Services System Lead.
Lisa Brown, recording secretary. Henry McCauley, superintendent of education.
Eva Kyriakides, Association for Bright Children, and SEAC chair. We have regrets from trustee Donna Edwards, from Rowan Jarvis from the Learning Disabilities Association, Durham Region, and from Morgan Cameron, member at large. And I believe Charmaine Brown from Ontario Parents of Visually Impaired Children will be coming in. Okay. Before we approve the agenda, I would like to switch the Inclusive Student Services Department report and the board report with which are 7 and 8, with 9 and 10 are senior team introductions and the presentation and discussion, just so that Stephanie and Michael can leave once they're finished. They don't have to sit through any unnecessary part of the meeting. If everybody's okay with that, can I get a motion to switch those two items? Elizabeth, seconders? Kara, all in favor? Perfect. With that change, can we get an approval of a motion for approval of the agenda? Kara, second? Elizabeth, all in favor? Okay. Perfect. Moving on to the minutes from the April 18th, 2024 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those minutes? And are there any questions or concerns with respect? Okay, can we get a motion to approve minutes? Sarah, second, Santa, all in favor? Motion passed. Okay. Then we are going to move on to our senior team introduction.
Right, so this evening, we, in a continued practice of having members of the senior team come and connect with SEAC. Pleased to introduce my colleague, Michael Bowman, who will give a bit of an overview of his portfolio.
All right, so thank you for having me. So my name is Michael Bowman. Just to give you a little bit of context, I started out my educational career as an educational assistant with the Metro Toronto School Board. The date that is a long time ago, 1993, I believe was the year I started. After moving to Durham, started to teach in Durham. I've been an administrator in Durham since 2003, 2004. I have taught in Oshawa. I have been an administrator in Pickering, Ajax, and Oshawa, and then joined as a system lead for Pickering in the north, was also responsible for Ajax, Pickering, and Oshawa. Assistant lead role for 6 years. Went back to RH Cornish for 4 months at the beginning of September. And then I have been in the role as superintendent of equitable education in the role of family of schools. I'm responsible for Maxwell Heights Secondary School and on the OCBI family of schools, as well as the portfolio for positive school climates. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me, welcoming me. And I'm going to.
I think so. So in the interest of how closely inclusive student services and positive school climate work together around condition setting for well-being, mental health, and how we tier together, partner together on support for our schools between our teams. We thought it was really poignant that Mike was scheduled to be here this evening as we welcome Stephanie, our mental health lead, to review the draft 2024-2025 mental health and well-being plan. It is a commitment of the work of the entire district, which we see well-being as one of the 3 pillars of the new multi-year strategic plan. But when we look at the action items that you'll see identified for the next school year, you will not be surprised to find quite strong threads of the work of positive school climate and inclusive student services, largely anchoring a fair amount of that work in terms of condition setting with schools and school teams for student and staff well-being. And so with that, we would welcome Steph. I don't know, Mike, if you want to give a further overview of kind of where we're situated, or if you want to another step.
Again, I think what Andrea has just said is important. A lot of conversation that Andrea and I have is along working together. We collaborate a lot on conversations because we see the intersection of mental health and well-being being a critical foundation for all the work that we do. So lots of ongoing conversations between how we support, because we all have the same for that information and those supports to reach students at their desks. So Stephanie is been a key aspect of the mental health and well-being action plan. She's gonna share the highlights with you.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here. I think to anchor this conversation, it's important to acknowledge that as a school board, we recognize that good mental health is an important foundation for achievement and well-being. And I believe I was previously at a SEAC meeting where we shared the image that you see here on the screen, which is our 3-year mental health and well-being action plan. At that time, we were able to walk you through the initial thinking of how this plan came to be. And at that time, I believe it was the first year of the 3-year plan. I'm going to draw your attention to the middle of the circle image, and I think it creates the connection between positive school climate and mental health. Is the vision to be committed to creating safe, welcoming, inclusive, and respectful learning spaces that promote well-being for students. It is that positive school environment, those everyday conditions that bolster and foster and protect student well-being. And that really has been the heart of the plan and the actions that we have taken over the course of these 2 years and now moving into the 3rd year. I believe earlier this year, we presented our PPM 169 policy paper. The ministry has made a commitment to student mental health. And I believe we shared with this committee the things that we as a board are already doing that align with the expectations tied to this new policy paper. And while the new policy paper was new in terms of the ministry holding expectations of school board around supporting student mental health and well-being, we can confidently say of all the expectations, we were active in all of them. And that, I think, speaks to the commitment that the board has to the important foundation that mental health has to student achievement and learning. So today, what we wanted to do is share with you the 1-year action plan for 24 and 25. And this will be a plan that takes us to the end of this plan with the intention for us to be thinking in the year ahead, how and in what areas will our focus be as we develop the next 3-year plan. And I am confident that this table is aware of what our mental health, our multi-year strategic plan. And so well-being continues to be a primary focus. And as we look for engaged, meaningful learning and engaged, connected communities, all of those are tied to the theme of creating safe, welcoming, inclusive, respectful learning spaces for students. So what I wanted to do is go over the plan with you. Part of that is just to sort of give this group information about the directions that we'd like to go. But a secondary intention is to seek feedback from this table in terms of what you heard, to hear from you a little bit more about how this plan, if we were to have all these actions in play at the end of next year, what would you want to see different? And what information would be important for you to know as we do this work? And how the ideas here align with what's important to you and what matters to you as you think about student mental health. So with that in mind, I think you all should have a handout. So I'll walk through that at a bit of a brisk pace, just wanting to appreciate that, you know, you've got more on the agenda, but at a pace that please do sort of let me know if there's any questions or any clarification. And speaking to Andrea about this plan, there's a lot of education in here, and I want to really appreciate that. This may be intuitive to me, but I don't want to make the assumption that all of the language and the acronyms are known to you. So slow down, ask questions. I'd like this to be as dynamic and as useful and as helpful to you as possible.
And we can step again on that one. It's really important that you do that because under PPM 169 and for rightful transparency with community, our 3-year and our 1-year action plans get posted publicly for families and community partners. And so if there is language that as an internal district team we've written that would be helpful to clarify in a different way. Tables like this are, as Stephanie said, are really, really important for calling that out to make sure that we've got language that is accessible for public facing document.
Thanks. I'm going to, when we get to places in the plan where there's an acronym, I'm going to just let you know what that acronym means in the event that you may not know. This is obviously not going to be the public facing document, but as we share the content, your feedback would be really helpful to what Andrew just said. And if you look at the image on the screen, you'll see some of that content here in terms of, it's almost like our just cause statement. Why is this so important to us? And we do believe it's important to learn how to support the everyday mental health and well-being of students and staff. It is those everyday conditions. And we commit to provide for our students and staff inclusive, identity affirming, and culturally relevant supports as needed. And then we strive to connect all students and staff to, from, and through the supports for those pathways for those support. So when we look at the learn to understand, it really is focused on mental health awareness and literacy. And I'm on the first page where the first action is tied to identity informed mental health literacy. And you'll see how it's organized. Our actions and focus areas are to the left, and to the right are the connections between the expectations within the policy paper that the ministries has set out for us to implement. And so back to the left, there is a big section on mental health literacy. So part of the policy paper is that there are now ministry mandated mental health modules and learning for students. In January, we implemented modules for grade 7 and 8 as part of the health and phys ed curriculum. It's not new curriculum, it was just modules that were written for all intermediate health teachers to teach the content. So with that in place, every intermediate teacher teaching health of 7, 8 have the same content across the entire province. A similar process is going to be rolled out in September for our grade 10 career studies. And so part of the plan is looking to partner intentionally with the different departments that are holding responsibility for curriculum expectations. So for 7, 8, it's our teaching and learning, and for our grade 10, it's our student success. And so there's a big part of support around the collaboration of that implementation. There are also some additional mental health and wellbeing roles being introduced to the system. And a big part of the plan is working in coordination and collaboration of those roles. So you'll see support and implementation of Apple facilitators and primary resource teachers. Those are roles that are new and being piloted in support of students' everyday conditions that support them in learning. You'll notice the number 2 in partnership with Positive School Climate. We are looking at different facilitator positions that again are meant in collaboration coordination to support our system in building the capacity to understand and become more aware of mental health literacy, looking at more of a cascade approach. And so what I mean by that, again, going to the right, you'll notice this phrase called the multi-tiered system of supports. And so there is a framework that school boards use across the province that takes a look at what all students need. And that's where the partnership with Positive School Climate is so fundamental. What do all students need? They need an environment that's safe, that's welcoming, that's inclusive. And so we work very closely together with all staff in service of all students. And so that's those foundational everyday practices across every classroom, through every school, really where every interaction becomes an opportunity to have an intervention to support students' positive mental health and well-being. And then we know that some students need more targeted support. We become bridge builders to those supports. And we know that there are a few students that need more intensive supports. And so that's the pathway to, from, and through those more intensive supports. And we do that with learning what all students need to learn, what some students need in terms of targeted supports, and what just a few students need that need more intensive academic supports. And that same model is being applied to mental health. And so a real big focus of this plan is the all for all, with an appreciation that not all students experience school the same way. And so how do we ensure that every student is surrounded by staff who understand what mental health is and what goes into fostering and promoting and bolstering individual mental health and well-being, as well as those environments. And so that's really what you're going to be reading under 1, 2, and 3. And part of that is really situating the system in a learning stance. What is it that we can do to build and enhance their understanding and awareness of mental health and literacy? And that is an expectation out of this PPM 169 that we are intentionally focusing on enhanced educator and staff mental health literacy. And so we're working in partnership, as Connor and myself with Andrew's leadership, lead through intensive student services. How are we partnering and delivering learning to our staff? We're partnering with family and our community engagement department so that we can also provide a series of learning opportunities for caregivers and community. And all of that cascading from mental health promotion to prevention to early intervention to support. It's not linear, it's very dynamic, it's multi-directional, meaning one influences the other. And so you'll hopefully read that throughout how we're looking at supporting mental health literacy. You'll see on the second page where they're setting everyday conditions. And again, there is a lot of partnering with Positive School Climate on what are those tier 1. And when I say tier 1, I am referring to the all for all. What is all students? How do we support all students? How do we get into the knowledge and the practice of every educator, the information, the ideas, the thinking, and the practices that can support students, so that kind of continue to bring us back to our overall plan. We're creating these safe, welcoming, inclusive, respectful learning spaces. And so really wanting to make sure that everyone sees this work as their work. And we're going to get a little bit later into some content that speaks specifically to mental health professionals who are doing more of that intensive work. But when you really think about what is the work of the school system, it is the mental health promotion and those everyday actions. So you're going to see a strong bias towards content related to that. So kind of moving forward, under the everyday conditions, we do offer social emotional learning programming and capacity building. We actually have a team that's dedicated to this. So social emotional learning are tied to 6 skills that the ministry has established as skills needed to support students as they engage in the everyday social engagement with each other. Their stress management as a social emotional skill, managing emotions, critical thinking, positive motivation, perseverance, healthy relationships. Did I say positive motivation, perseverance? I did that. Sense of identity. Sorry. And so those are the 6 skills, and if you were so inclined to pull up the Ontario curriculum, you'll see aspects of that woven through. And so this is an opportunity for us to do that with intention across our schools. You'll see again more related to educator and staff literacy. You'll see that that actually gets cascaded down between from a senior team learning to an administrator school leader learning to a school staff learning. So we're looking at general, we're looking at school-based, and we're looking at leadership-focused. We know that there is within every school an expectation for positive school climate teams. Maybe that's a new term for you. Used to be called safe schools. If that sounds more familiar, and so every school is expected to have a safe schools team, or what we now refer to as a positive school climate team. And the intention is for a proactive group to think about how do we create those environments where kids thrive. And so really working together with those teams at school planning level. We continue to think about how to get the information to all educators, to all staff. And so that's where the monthly communication plan. There is number 6 under the setting the everyday conditions. And my hope is that in time, you will be able to see a newsletter come across your email box that is saying, here, families, or some information that you can consider to support and your own students. Here's what's happening at school. So that communication and link to families and school is bolstered, specific to the theme of mental health and well-being. You'll see number 7 is we've got some work ahead. As this plan comes to an end, we need to have a plan in place to develop the next 3-year plan. We want to work really closely with all of our department colleagues in the implementation of the multi-year strategic plan. And that's what you're going to see in the last action under setting conditions. And so really wanting to align with the multi-year strategic plan and creating opportunities where, as we think about what does well-being, meaningful learning, connected communities look like, going to our students and our families to get an idea of what they think and feel belonging and a sense of community would mean to them, so that we can build mechanisms and processes in place to honor that. And then support to strengthen is more tied to, so that's the all. These are the foundational pieces, and as we continue to build on that multi-tiered, when we think about the sum, what does some students need in terms of perhaps more targeted skill building? We're looking at building staff capacity around specific areas. And so when you look at the bottom of, I wish these were numbered, I'm sorry about that, 2 or 3, sorry, you'll see provide mental health first aid. And so that's exactly what it sounds. When, if anyone is taking a physical health first aid, this is tied to the theme of mental health first aid. What are those key concepts we need to know? Not to do mental health work, but to be able to identify and get student support. Safe talk. Talk is an acronym around having conversations with students who may be thinking about suicide. How to have that conversation. Assist is applied suicide intervention skills training. It's a framework that's our board and many boards across the province use to support conversations around keeping kids safe when there has been intentions around suicide or even an attempt on suicide. It's a very concrete, distinct framework that really supports students and then creates a response plan for those who continue to support that student. And then ARTO stands for Assessment of Risk to Others, and it's a model that our school board uses to do exactly that. For students that may be at risk to others, how do we walk alongside in ways that help them feel supported? And that's, again, all part of our multi-tiered system of support. This is more focused skill building around specific areas. You'll see number 2, trauma-informed practice system training. That is looking at setting the conditions for trauma-informed leadership. And then the third is doing some more focused guidance training, as guidance are often the door into the pathway to, from, and through mental health supports. And then continuing on is the identity-informed responsive mental health services. You may be aware that services are staffed with regulated mental health professionals, social workers, and psychological services staff who provide individual counseling and therapy to students. And so they do that in a way that is affirming of the student identity and also looking at ways in which, both from an individual perspective as well as group, and you'll see that for number 2, Affirm is a 2S LGBTQI+ support group for students. BE is Black Excellence Made Evident, and our GSAs and our BSAs are affinity spaces. And so much of our mental health team is supporting schools and students within these specific affinity spaces. And then the last area is connect pathways, and this is where as a district, we have a suicide prevention, intervention, postvention protocol. And so it really is focused on life promotion, which then looks at that being a responsibility of every single educator supporting every single student to embrace life. But we know that's not the case for every student. Some students really struggle. And so we have a protocol in place that guides our system in how to be responsive. And we do have an expectation as a board through actually PPM 169 to review that regularly. And so you'll see that in here. We want to provide training on that protocol. We continually actively engage with our local community partners. I think about the engagement in the partnership here. This is not work that's done in isolation. And we know the need is great, and we need to partner with our partners in the community in doing this work. And strengthening that partners will only strengthen the pathways for students that move to and from. So that's the whirlwind view of the action plan. Any questions before I invite us to do some collective thinking?
Back on the first page, number 2, where it talks about implementation of well-being facilitator position. I'm just wondering if more information can be given now, but also ought to be given to, that this is gonna be a public document. So I don't know what that means. So the first thing I thought is, are those teachers, are those social workers, who are those people? And I imagine other people would have that same question.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if anyone's wondering who the Apple facilitators are.
Yeah, well, that too.
Thank you, that's exactly the feedback we want.
Yeah. And I had another point with number 4 there. When you were describing it to us, you added for caregivers and community, but I don't think that's self-evident without those words. So that you may wish to add those for the public facing document.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you.
That's it, go ahead.
All right, so I have 2 questions. One's kind of a bit, so I'll start with the easier one. I noticed that there's a trend to defocus anti-Black racism within government systems. There are trainings, the protocols, and here we have listed targeted staff skills building training, and I noticed there wasn't anything on anti-Black racism, inclusion for racism. Will that still be a focus within the board?
What's your major one?
So if we think back to, and I don't know the months when Superintendent Lazarus and the team were here around the District 7 and the compendium for Black Student Success 2.0. So, and I apologize, I'm gonna jump back and forth between context of table conversations and entry points. So as a district, we are now into our second plan in terms of really clearly articulated commitments to address anti-Black racism and the promotion of Black affirmation and excellence, both from a curriculum perspective, from a staffing perspective, representation and experience, both. And then how our students engage with mental health and well-being supports. So your point's extremely well taken in terms of how do we make that linkage really clear in terms of the actions identified district-wide at a compendium that oversits the whole district and how that draws specific connection in a similar way that we're doing for the special education plan around processes mirroring for that. I think too, where there's opportunity, so Be Me, the Black excellence made evident, came from our teams and designed by our teams responsive to local student needs and what students were expressing as experiences in schools. I think that came alongside then what training do team members need in order to support that work, but also the allyship that happens around that work as we protect that space for Black identifying staff and students to gather in community in a meaningful way. And so I think that is invitation to articulate that to a greater extent in terms of those conversations and the knowledgeable others that we're having conversations with that are bringing forth the knowledge and lived experience of the team members, but also then raising the knowledge and expertise of the entire team. We can definitely amplify that connect point to the larger district plan, but the specifics and bracketed examples of how that works being engaged. I think it will also be clearer. So right now, kind of the invisible column is the metrics and impact of how will we know that we've done this work next year? How are we monitoring the work for the impact to revise kind of the goals as we go along, and then how will we know that we've done the work? And I think that's where there's also opportunity to be very clear. We don't want to get too far ahead of the affinity learning circles that we're going to do with various student groups to help inform the next 3-year plan. But in that, how do we demonstrate evidence to kids in the community that we're engaged in the work rather than an annual timestamp? So
Thank you. I am looking to see when that work stops becoming silo and becomes
infused. And so if I may on that one too, so we've taken this plan to our senior team as well. And as a mental health leadership team, and I want to represent the conversation, we had a conversation that sat with, if we identify it separately and distinct as a goal, it does not read as infused in every single one of these commitments. And so our learning was that we, and similar to what Stephanie invited in terms of the language within the plan, we know our intention and the teams that are living this work know the intention is it is part of every single conversation. So if we go to provide family caregiver events, what are the considerations? When we go to look at service parameters, what are the considerations? What we heard from our senior team was we are not yet at a point where the assumption can be made without a public declaration that it is woven into every single one, that it still needs to be. And so part of what we've been working on is what comes in front of this that says all of the following work is through the layer of commitment to and making it very explicit around anti-Black racism, some other trends in education in Durham and in our district. And so making it clearer, because we didn't want it to be performative in being a tag to each action item, even though that's the lived commitment of the work. And so we're just balancing how do you articulate it as a foundation and for it to read with everything without it having performative in terms of being part of a sentence tag, but being in the work. So really appreciate the feedback because it's something that we're working on and something that will hold, especially when we look at the metrics and the impact of how we then report back and monitor. I would agree based on that, and we're not yet at a point where it is infused. Thank you, but you had a second question.
I do have a second question, sorry.
No,
This is the one that I said was loaded, but it's not an attack, it's really just hopefully a plan for the future, right? You said that you wanna look at the 3-year plan, some trends that I noticed that are directly related to the average childhood experience is we have a high number of new immigrants who are here under education plans, which will have firstborn Canadians. That experience is very, can be very different. Migration is one of those key factors under the average childhood experience, as well as the state of our world, right? We have at minimum 4 wars in Africa, the Middle East, and the Russia-Ukraine is not yet settled. When I've noticed that we've had this kind of upheaval in the world, we, Canada, one of the more first developed, quote unquote, right, financially secure countries, we welcome those who are coming from big T traumas, right, and bringing their children with them. As well as just last year, we had a bunch of African refugees from across mostly West Africa who are still living in church basements, right? And I wonder, knowing that those are the things, the migration, the trauma, the lived trauma, the firstborn Canadians, and we know some of the things that can affect those families and those children as they come to our schools. Can we start doing some planning, some training for our staff about that kind of trauma-informed work? So that we can start planning that 3-year plan for these families that I know are coming up.
I will, you'll see in here, there is an intention to develop our leadership in their knowledge and awareness of trauma-informed practice. And when we think about that, we think about how leaders lead school leaders so that school leaders can lead staff who then can support and surround their students. And so really wanting to create a system understanding of what that means so that individuals like Andrea and Michael, as they navigate their role and support school leaders, can infuse that with an understanding of trauma-informed to guide. The intention is to think about how we can cascade that learning through the entire system. Not to get too clinical here, but when you think about, one of the most healing interventions when it comes to trauma is a relationship. And when we see this circle on the outside is relationship building and engagement, and it is a key priority for, I don't know what you want, it's an anchor, it's a key enabler to making this plan come to life. If I could say anything about this plan, it is be a kind, caring human being to each other. And when I think of trauma-informed work and what becomes so facilitated to navigate traumatic experiences, it is that healing relationship. And so we're really trying to focus on connection, on relationships. And so that's where some of that intention will be placed. And what is good for kids who have experienced trauma is particularly good for every single student. We want everyone to experience the kind, caring relationship. So I'm hoping this resonates. I'm noticing your smile, and I think
I
hoping
want to
this
show
is like
all my team because to move trauma to experience is relationship and coping, right? So, yeah.
Go ahead, Allison.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Thank you. Just maybe it's something for your consideration. I wonder if in that targeted skills building section, something could be said about providing opportunities to understand the potential intersections of things like race and mental health, poverty and mental health. Maybe it's implicit by saying identity affirming, but I don't think the word intersectionality shows up anywhere in this document, and it might be useful for that to be part of the training that
those intersections between different identity markers and how that impacts mental health.
I really appreciate that. And now I do believe in the page before at the top, I may have actually missed that. There is a section, there's an area for.
Oh, yes, I see that.
Yeah.
Yes, I see that now, number 5, yes.
Do you think the way that's written speaks to what you just mentioned, or would it benefit to amplify that in a different way?
Personally, I would like to see it as something that's part of additional training for staff, for leaders, just because it's very, for those of us who are already aware of it, it's second nature, but there are people who may not have considered that your mental health is impacted because you're poor or you are minoritized in some other way. So if it could be factored in, that would be my recommendation, just one person.
More explicit.
Yes.
A few things, just sort of easy question, partnership with talking about caregivers. Is any thought been given to delivery channels for caregivers given, is this in person, is this presentation, is this digital material, what is that delivery mechanism? Knowing that a lot of caregivers are booked out and they may not have time to attend sessions and things like that, so just park in that. Some people just can't people today, so I really just need to do it consume a little time. So just baking that thought process in. The other piece of this, that is, I think, it kind of sort of speaking to the same thing for the intersectionality. Mental health in a lot of cases is about feeling safe and feeling secure, feeling included. So things like bullying, cyberbullying, and all of that. I don't really see kind of any of sort of speaking to all of those other things. We have the school's code of conduct and all of our good, safe schools stuff. Like, how do we bake that stuff in there as well? Simply because we know if I don't feel safe going to school, it doesn't matter what the teacher's happy if I'm worried that Jimmy's going to bully me today.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is there something like that we've got to be more explicit about?
So I'll start and I'll look over to see if I do something. So part of so the answer is yes. Schools are under a regulation to have anti-bullying plan, have a safe schools plan. The challenge when we go to write documentation and action plans for a year. And I think as a board, we've had to unlearn some habits. And so as a board, and again, I've got tenure in the district, similar to what Mike described, we have overstuffed documents and created large volumes and then made them really pretty. But that they're hard to maneuver because there is so much in them, and I see traces of that because our principals have to implement them with their teams, right? And so what we've really tried to do, and I think the multi-year strategic plan that's coming out is a key example of a streamlined document that speaks very specifically to the commitments that are being actioned in that year and that are not habits of practice. So anything that is a habit of practice or an ongoing requirement is considered part of the fabric of the district and exists where it does in policy, practice, procedure, but that we're not, there's a ton of things that teams and schools and staff supports do to support student and staff mental health. What we didn't do is say, and here's all the things we're already doing and we're gonna monitor and continue planning for. The action plans are specifically tied to what will be different in the year ahead in terms of novel or change. Those things that are embedded practice like anti-bullying plans and the requirements of such. We remind schools, we work with school leaders to implement those with their school teams and share that information. But in terms of board action plans, we've pulled that out so that the information to the community and for ourselves can be really succinct on what is the difference next year. Now we're gonna have a bit of a different conversation with the special education plan because it has requirements for being almost new access for learners or for readers. But in terms of mental health wellbeing action plan, the multi-year strategic plan, operational plan, they're very succinct because they're focused on what is different or new versus embedded practice. So those things that you mentioned are really important, but they are built expectation for a number of reasons, both internal and external to the district.
Is it then useful for documentation to say, by the way, all these good things, they're over here? I don't know, like just.
It would be longer than this document.
Okay.
Like, and I don't mean that to be
Yeah.
like, but it would, the list of what this connects to, as Stephanie said, this is like, there's a lot in terms of everyday conditions, relationship building, safety practices, proactively, responsibly. I think of our mitigating risk of injury procedure that sits alongside those. It's probably 50 pages onto it. Like, the list would be longer than the action plan. So it's always that balance point. And then we also look, common to discussion around this table is making sure that the information is accessible in every definition of accessibility, reading level, language. And so the more you put in it, the less inherently accessible it is, but it really is to focus on what is the difference in intention of next year or 3 years, depending on yeah. But I don't know.
No, I was gonna say, literally along the same lines, is we really great at creating documents and loading it with content. And then when we have conversations about student mental health, all of those pieces, so when you talk about an anti-bullying plan, yes, it is an expectation that a school has a plan. But when we talk about the key tenets that Stephanie's talked about, building connection, building relationships, understanding trauma-informed practices, all of those pieces would be part of your anti-bullying plan. Right, so rather than framing it as just a plan, because when we frame it as an anti-bullying plan, it's a piece of paper, it's how are we gonna translate those actions into the everyday conditions, right? Because as you said, the lived and living experiences that students encounter when they enter spaces looks very, very different depending on a lot of characteristics, right? So a lot of those pieces are interwoven in those documents, so again, it would look a lot. And to your point, I pulled up a document. We actually have a document called Historical and Current Global Events Response Considerations that we have shared through the anti-oppression department with administrators and school teams to talk through some of those pieces that you alluded to. So it does exist. So it is, but it's a great thing to point out about making a connection to, because I think we can do that.
Yeah, I think more, but for me, it was more if this is a document that is being publicly shared, then someone who is not well versed in everything else is going, oh, what about this, what about this, what about this,
It depends where we nested in.
right, and so just some, maybe just think about that as well, just to say, people are doing tons of really, really, really good things, guys, it's not just this, but so just.
Very fair.
That's something to share.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Oh, no, I'm sorry,
Sure, so Kelly was just explaining to me that there are different teams at the school, is it the school level or the family schools?
Yes, so under, on the second page, under studying the everyday conditions, in number one, I was explaining to her about like how the work is implemented through the different teams, so she wanted to know a little bit more about what kind of teams or what does that look like, classroom teams.
Yeah, I just don't know what that means, but I can get that question answered later. I feel like I'm kind of monopolizing my questions.
That's why we're here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Studying everyday conditions.
Is it the in the partnership list?
It's page 2.
The everyday conditions, the second cell, and it's the first point.
In partnership with?
Yes.
So, in terms of this district structure, so we are structured like many corporations, in terms of department structures that all wrap around and are in support of schools and students. So always, as Mike's used the phrase a couple times, around the student experience, student desk. So how does everything link to how our kids experience learning and well-being in schools? So Mike leads the team that's referred to as the Positive School Climate Department. So that's a central team similar to Inclusive Student Services Department, is where quite a few of us situate.
Right.
And then when we talk about school and classroom teams, for me, the visual that comes up when I think about a school team, I'll think of Tracy's school, so O'Neill. It's the administrative team, all of the educators in the building and all the various roles, the clerical staff, the facility staff. Because when I think about all of the individuals that connect with kids throughout the day or help support their school experience, that to me is the school team.
Okay.
And then each of the schools, we have a beautiful example tonight. Mike's role as family and school superintendent is directly connected to the school that Tracy leads. When I think about classroom teams, I think about all of the educators and support staff in that space connected to that smaller community of learners that are together for either a portion of the day in secondary or throughout the day in elementary. So I think of the teacher as kind of that curriculum teaching lead. I think of the various roles that we deem, and again, another term, classroom support staff, to use that umbrella of educational assistants, ASL interpreters, interveners, language acquisition support worker, as well as Stephanie's referenced our regulated health staff that work with us as part of the department, teachers of deaf, hard of hearing, teachers of blind, low vision, how they come in and out. And when I think of a classroom team, I think of the adults that wrap around kids on a regular and consistent basis in their classroom programs. But I think this is her lived reality every day, so I'm just checking to make sure that
Thank you.
we may be in sync on those definitions or not.
You said it perfectly.
Yeah, so I just think of those like the layers of community that wrap around, but really the students at the center, and then how do we build those rings of support and accountability to them for their learning and well-being.
And even as we look at K-12 plus in terms of summer assistance as well, you have to think of those early childhood educators who are part of
Oh, right.
the team. They are
Horrible,
they
I'm sorry.
really,
Thank you for catching that.
but they're really integral within that space as well. So that's when we think of those classroom teams, and there's lots of people who can come in and out as well as all our support teams who will meet in those spaces more or something in those spaces.
Thank you guys so much for putting them into the space they are.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot.
Yeah, any other questions?
I have one question about social emotional learning programming and capacity building. There has been a lot of conversation, it was withheld in the math curriculum for a couple of years when it came out. What exactly is that social emotional learning? Is there a particular programming or framework that is being used for that? Because we know that has been and continues to be problematic for many students.
Well, thank you, it's a great question. We've leaned heavily into resources developed by School of Ontario. School of Ontario, if we're not aware, is it's an implementation support organization that's a bit of an arm of the ministry. They work in partnership with the ministry. They're not the Ministry of Ed, but working with them to develop resources that are provided to the province, school boards across the province, specific around everyday condition setting resources, the tier 2, what are some more targeted supports. And so they had developed a series of resources specific to social emotional learning. So we have a team of child youth workers that have taken those resources, they've knit them together in a series of conversations, and they go into classrooms and they share those conversations with students while also walking alongside with the educator of the classroom, almost in a coaching, modeling way to say, here are the conversations, and as the staff lead, the teacher sort of picks that up and sustains the conversation. So maybe it's more than your question, but it's tied to resources. We've tried to be very cautious about how we implement social emotional learning, aware that just even in its orientation as a skill, we don't come into classrooms assuming you don't have the skill, and so I have to teach you the skill. We try very hard to just really meet students where they're at, but also challenge the educator. So we'll give you an example of one of the skills of stress management and coping. Sometimes for our students, the classroom is the stressor. And so it's kind of difficult to sort of, I'm gonna tell you how to manage your stress, I'm gonna give you ideas, and invite you to think about how stress shows up for you and what you can do about it. And then you continue to be in an environment that's stressful. So we really try to work with that tension and work specifically with the school and class teams in support of students. So this becomes part of the fabric of how they do their classroom. Does that make sense? Thank you. Feedback was invaluable. If you've taken notes and you haven't been able to share them, maybe you're, you can pass them to Andrew if anything pops up. Really welcome. This has been a really helpful and informative conversation as we go to finalize this to put it onto our website in June. So my guess is you will see your imprint on the final document. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to go to the Inclusive Student Services Department report. And just for a little bit of clarity, just timing wise, there's some information that's going to be presented with respect to budget that is actually going to be added to this, if that's okay with everybody. And then Andrew will share the DDSB accessibility update video electronically, just to save time and sort of focus on priority.
It was presented to board, so we'll send you the link of the presentation to board as well as the video link itself. Just so you can do that.
Okay. All right, so handing it over to Connor.
Perfect, thank you. So it's actually kind of hard to think that we are at volume 9 of our Inclusive Student Services Impact Updates right now. So this particular impact update is focusing on one of our special education class programs for our program classrooms called our developmental program. The focus of this particular program, some of those program outcomes are focused on individual growth and development of our students in areas such as communication, sensory integration skills, gross and fine motor development, social skills, and personal development skills. And throughout this classroom, we want to note that there's a maximum of 6 students who are part of that roster, and at times require some significant sensory support, as well as some of those daily living and some of those more medical supports, as well, inclusive of nursing at times. Our family and caregivers, as with all of our special education class programs, they are essential and incredible partners with us, and we always appreciate that, and the quotes speak to that. I didn't do them justice by reading them, but the quotes speak to that as well. The classroom team, as we know, they do have a classroom teacher as well as 2 educational assistants who comprise part of that classroom team, as we're definitely talking about that. But it's also one of our most diverse teams when we start looking at some of those other professionals who layer in. Inclusive of occupational therapists, nursing, physiotherapists, as well as, in fact, through our school base, we have Vocative Services partnership with Granby Kids, as well as, again, our speech and language pathologists, our psychological services staff, social work. There's so many different people who layer into these particular spaces as well. And we also want to highlight that oftentimes there's strong connections with our teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing, as well as teachers of our blind low vision. And part of that classroom environment, it's actually one of our, it's one of the most, I'm trying to find the right words, but it's diverse. Each developmental classroom is very, very unique in terms of the physical setup and the physical makeup, because so many of the needs of the particular students, as well as their strengths and interests in the program goals of each student, are so very unique. And meeting those particular components. So as you can see, there's even things such as ball pits, there are swings, there are providing some vestibular input as well as a large number. You will see in just about every single classroom, the developmental classroom, you'll see multiple wire lifts to be able to facilitate that safe transfer for our students in a really good way. And then something as well, we partner and we have 2 facilitators who work as our innovative ed facilitators who partner between the 2 departments, the Student Services and Embedded Education. And part of what they do is that they bring, they little bit of a bias for some of the work that are done in developmental classes because they really love the fact that you can see so much of the communication, you are seeing so many different things come out, and sometimes finding those really unique solutions to some of the points of communication as well. So we think such as highlighted here is use of switches to be able to do that in multiple different ways and individualize stats and scores as well. And it's not just for communication, but it's also cause and effect and being able to interact. Today, summer speech and language is actually today being serviced on program clicker, which actually on a Promethean board, and being able to see that interaction with those technology components, and then being able to play as well. And one of the highlights that came out is that actually very well switch control as well in many different aspects. So there's lots of different things that can come out of this particular program. Also want to bring a highlight around service annuals as part of the annual update that does take place. So DDSB has a long-standing history of inclusion of certified service annuals for students or staff. Use service animals for accommodation and are the independent handlers of those service animals. So our procedure delineates service animals, support animals, and visiting animals as well. So PPM 163 outlines the responsibility of school districts to publicly report data around service animals annually. So we do that to SEAC each year on an annual basis, and through the related minutes that goes through to board as well. So this year we were able to say that we have 4 service animals in individual secondary schools and 1 service animal active in an elementary school. And there's also approval in place for another and working with family towards entry towards school as well. In terms of visiting animals, we currently have 9 secondary schools where that takes place, as well as 4 elementary schools. And we also, as part of that inclusive approach as well, we wanted to also say that we do have multiple schools who also welcome service animals with parent and family caregivers as the handlers on school grounds daily during pickup and drop-off times as well. And also noticing that one of the big keys, and you've heard it repeated a few times, that the animals are trained and licensed for that service as well.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. I'm just wondering, are parents of children who meet these criteria of significant physical, intellectual, or developmental disabilities, are they entitled to a developmental placement if they want, or how does that work when the need outnumbers the actual spaces in classrooms?
Yeah, so that comes into throughout the year, this process, the consideration, so it's really about consideration as we look towards that because as we move around through that, we start with and always consider our mainstream classrooms as our most inclusive environment for students and for students with various interests, strengths, and needs. Moving to some of our most intensive and sometimes we can also say somewhat restrictive classrooms, which would be special education full-time. Because when we realize there's the fabric of the school, as we've heard through some of the other conversations, there's the fabric of the school that intertwines and that integration within those classrooms, throughout the entire school and feeding into those classrooms, is that so the question of a student who meets criteria. So we look at it's a complex process for consideration for students who are being considered for special education class placement. We are a rapidly growing district where we do try to look at all the various trends that are coming throughout the system. But again, we also have many families who may be able to be put forward for consideration and may do that, but they also say to us, not now. This is not the right time for my student. This particular time, the timing is within families, but it's something that is part of the conversation with families as well. And it isn't necessarily an entitlement per se to it. It's more around look at how we're going to meet those individual programming and those individual program considerations, the program goals and considerations, and ultimately the least restrictive environment for a student as well. And we're always trying to build in those layers too.
gathered, Jen Machin, who's our manager of budget and finance, presented on what we knew in that moment of time, which was the framework of education funding up until this June that was in place. And so since then, we have received the budget information from the Ministry of Ontario, or from the Ministry of Education, sorry. And we do know that there's some code switching and language switching, as well as a reframing of some of the allocation funds. So with consideration of SEAC, we're gonna kind of quietly, we're gonna move through. Stop me at any point if there's questions in terms of it, but it will be a recodification for those of you that are familiar with special education funding, because some of the terms have changed, or how some of the funds are grouped have changed. We're gonna talk a little bit about the board's draft budget. Where we sit currently in this moment of time in the district is that the draft budget for both revenue, money into the district, and expenditure, how we plan on spending that, has been shared with trustees. That information is not yet public and goes public tomorrow. So we're in a bit of a time sensitivity where Kelly and I are not intentionally withholding information, but some information hasn't gone yet into a public space. But in conversation with our Associate Director for Corporate Services, we also asked that we could share a bit more this evening, knowing that the release was imminent and that SEAC is usually so gracious in doing a deputation, and Education Finance moved from Tuesday to Monday night. So we do have a bit of a time pinch. So with that in mind, Dave gave permission to share a little bit more than we usually would before, just cognizant that this is a live streamed public meeting. So this evening, it does look like a bit of a walkthrough in a bit of a different way, because some of the terms, as I said, have changed, particularly as we move from grants for student needs to core education funding. So the whole, if you consider the technical paper for the budget coming into districts as a book with chapters and special education as one of the chapters, the title of the book changed in terms of, we're gonna walk through that a little bit. You see kind of the outline and intention of the information for you this evening. What you'll see on screen has a few more slides than the printed deck. What we've done is Lisa and I have condensed it to kind of the book chapters of special education funding, and we've added some additional information on the slides. I didn't want to be giving you a really thick, overwhelming deck. If you're sitting at any point this evening and saying, I have those slides as well, we're happy to circulate the wider deck as soon as the information goes. The other thing is I'd like to keep tonight tight to, I know we usually keep kids as their holistic selves in terms of special education, strengths and programming needs, mental health and well-being. There are slides tucked at the end around mental health funding, but I was going to pause on that this evening. But it is there if you've got questions about that, but my intention was to not in detail walk through that this evening based on special education and the core responsibility of SEAC in terms of consultative to the district around special education. So as we said, the Ministry of Education funding to districts, so grants for student needs goes out of your brains, and core education funding is now kind of that title for that funding book. And districts receive that at the same time as the public release on April 26th. And so that's when the team had kind of draft planning in place, but the team starts to map revenue with expenditures based on those actuals of the commitments from the ministry. And so there is what we call B memos or memos from the ministry that outline the details of expectations to districts. And again, in your the link that Lisa would have shared as well as this PowerPoint, both of those are live links. One is a few page summary of here's kind of the overview of the changes. And then the technical paper is the literally the book on the what are the formulas and what are the exact amounts and what are the descriptions. That's mainly what our finance team uses. And some of us, Jen laughed, I sent her a text at noon on Saturday and said, is it wrong that I took this morning with a cup of coffee and read it? But there's a few of us that read it right through. So now currently, and again, taking the overall umbrella of all revenue into public school boards, core education funding, so all of the revenue into districts from the ministry is now made up of 6 funds. And you see those listed. So classroom, learning resource, special education, so it's no longer the special education grant, it is the special education fund. And so you see a lot of that term change from grants to funds. Facilities, transportation, and then board administration. So this evening, we're gonna hone right in on the special education fund, but that's where it sits. So there's now 6 allocation or 6 funds that comprise. Around this table, and raised by many SEACs provincially, has been concern for using outdated census information. So up until again, next month, funding has largely drawn on the 2006 census. And as local residents to the region, we can all say that that is no longer representative of the communities in which our schools serve. So within the information, because I think this is important when census information does feed into some of the special education funds, there is a commitment in a multi-year implementation to move towards the updated census. A portion of the special education fund does flip this year, but it will take a few years for that to be completely revised and moved away from the 2006, and the language that the ministry used was phased out over 5 years. There is a statement within the funds, not relative to Durham District School Board, but if you're talking to other association representatives in other parts of the province for your organizations, there is a commitment that this move will not penalize boards financially. So there is a consideration for that, not a local context issue for us, but it is their consideration. So that's kind of the big thing. The special education fund, and again, this is money into the district. So the special education fund is now made up of 4 buckets of funding. And so one is the special education fund per pupil amount. So that's a direct enrollment draw. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute. Differentiated needs allocation, complex support, and specialized equipment. So the plan is we're gonna dive into each of those 4 buckets just briefly, but keep in mind, so 1, and then we're coming into the special education fund, envelope funding must be spent on special education, cannot be reattributed to any other purpose. All 4 of these funds are protected. So we're just gonna go through each one briefly. So on screen, you see the description of the per pupil allocation. So it's to support all students. And again, this is information drawn directly from the technical guide. And so where we locally, and you heard Connor use it, refer to students with special education strengths and programming needs, the language of the ministry is special education needs. So that's where you'll see that language because it is a direct draw. And so it is intended for staffing costs and professional development and learning materials. So who's with the kids? What are they using? And how are we continuing to develop the staff that wrap around them? So this was previously SEAC for those that are that speak the old language, is in terms of that per pupil amount. We can see that there. And this is the new calculation. So the district draws based on our enrollment projections. And again, there's a true up in October where we call it revised estimates, and there's adjustments if we've had growth over the summer, which we anticipate. But this is the dollars in for every pupil in the district. So not just the kids who have individual education plans, but based on the overall enrollment of the district and providing good supports and resources for students. So that's the first bucket, the per pupil allocation. The second bucket is the differentiated needs amount. And so you see that, that this is where the first bucket, same for all districts based on your enrollment, the differentiated needs allocation starts to do what it exactly says in the title, differentiate for local context on a variety of factors. There is a rural amount, say for the North schools, and different socioeconomic demographic information embedded in this. Complex. So you'll see, those of you that were familiar with the previous, you'll see measures of variability, which has been pulled from previous. But you see those different aspects, including multidisciplinary supports, collaboration. We do not identify expenditures for each of these buckets individually. We take the money and revenue and we map it against our programs and services. And so although we can say what revenue comes in under each of these, we can adjust within the overall bucket of funds to meet local needs. The third bucket is complex supports allocation. And you can see there's some language from special incidents portion, because you're gonna see that term come up again. But interesting is that the education community partnership amount, which was previously separate, the day treatment or growth that we've talked about, is now folded. It's still application based, but it's now considered inside and not separate. So that's specifically referenced in terms of our kids who need 2 or more full-time supports and those that cannot attend regular school due to primary needs of care, treatment, or custody. And so you see within that, there are actually 3 amounts. So special incidents portion, lots of conversation over time at this table. That was the grant formula dance. It remains a formula, but what the ministry has done is put the word interim in front of it. So they're still figuring that out. Connor and I have been engaged in conversations over the last couple months, as many districts have been, as the ministry is looking to how do we do that in a meaningful way to support students through districts. Education community partnerships locally is our growth school, and behavior expertise component is what we use to fund teams such as the autism resource team and different aspects to that. But again, it goes into the overall model of supports. So I've just added a couple slides for the context of those newer drawing funds. So this is part of the deck that I can send that has a lot more information in it. But again, it's interim approach. And so we'll wait to see what happens in the 2025, 2026 information. You see the description, and I've just referenced our impact update. So kind of referenced that our developmental one was issue 9 a few months ago. We brought you on education community partnership programs, and so I've just put that link in there in case it's an easy link to what were those programs again, so that you've got that information, and just that it is adjusted. So where a teacher falls on a grid in each of the classrooms, that's what we're accountable for. So a year 7 secondary teacher salary drop, that program is funded for that year's grid placement of the teacher. So it's a very accurate and intensely monitored true outcome funding. And there you see in terms of behavior expertise amount around ABA, applied behavior analysis expertise, both for the professionals, so we can use it for staffing, training, so sometimes that's teacher release or educational assistant release for training, and it's also our after school skills development program, which is the direct service to students outside of the school day as well and in the summer. And then the fourth bucket is our specialized equipment, and again, I didn't, but I should have linked to the September impact update, but it has changed slightly. So the guideline, in addition, the acronym remains the same. The titling has been changed a little bit. It was special equipment amount. It is now specialized equipment allocation. And that may sound semantically different, but where it is magnitudinally different is that we used to be on a claims-based amount where the board paid the first $800 of a deductible against health equipment, safety equipment. That amount has now moved to a $5,000 base amount in terms of district responsibility. And so that changes a few things. It's articulated as an efficiency support in terms of administrative task work in terms of the responsibility. Our budget team has done an analysis of what that change means for us as a district, taken our spending habits and our purchasing habits over the last few years in support of students, scaled that to increased enrollment. And so within the draft budget that trustees will be given an overview of Monday night, there has actually been additional dollars to the C fund added in order to keep pace and service inside the district, So no impact to student access to equipment or technology that it's being built in to keep pace with that,
So we now have $5,000 deductible instead of $800.
essentially. So how are we working with the school-based rehab team at Grandview to help them understand that? I also think too, our conversations have been to make sure that there remains an integrity to the ordering, that we don't just jump to more expensive equipment in order to access that, that public funds are public funds, whether they be board allocated base amounts or claims amounts from the ministry, those are still public dollars. And so centering the service and accommodations of students with the fiduciary around public funds needs to hold as an integrity for the yes and of both of those things. And we've had some conversation around that.
Does this not hit on some human rights, fundamental human rights?
It's a shift of funding. No, and I think what it means too is because the amounts have changed coming into districts, so we have a bit more funds that are within the control of the district. That, for instance, one of the things sitting in my inbox that the team has shared today is our SEAC, our reporting to the ministry is due, and it goes line by line down to the penny of every amount, anything above 800. So now you take that whole team and you say, you don't have to do anything below 5,000. It actually reduces an administrative load on the team and puts time and service back to kids. So there is, it does alleviate a bit of an administrative burden and put staffing back, and we've done the monitoring in terms of no change to the access for kids in what they need in order to access meaningful learning.
Yeah, no, 100%, and then even around that, per pupil amount, which is the other component, they're happy slightly increase, I mean, not slightly, they're happy it increases, on that per pupil amount that's designed to offset it. As Andrea said, it doesn't quite offset based on, again, access to equipment, as well as basic acts to districts, because they're not all districts are in our position where we are growing rapidly. So something like that is very important for a district.
So that's a really quick overview of the special education fund. So again, we've got 6 allocations coming into districts. Special education is one of the 6. And then within the special education fund, there are now the 4 buckets of funding coming in. That's the information from the ministry, and I'm about to turn to district level information unless there's any questions to that point. And again, this is my test run because it's all new terms. So hopefully that landed, but we will send a broader one that has those additional. I just didn't want to overwhelm with material at the table, knowing that some things had shifted as well.
Per pupil allocation is more than it has been before.
For SEAC.
Yeah.
So within the specialized equipment, there is a per pupil amount, there's a base component and then a per pupil amount, and that per pupil amount has gone up as well as the claims-based amount going up. So it kind of balances, but it didn't quite, so our team has topped it up.
And then other allocations outside of special ed, is there similar changes in
It's a bit of a
allocation
dance.
for students?
It's a bit of a dance. I haven't gone all the way through it for the others, because of the timing. I've been immensely involved in the support to students. But we do know this session on Monday night is in public session and live stream. So what we can do is share the link, and Jen will be given a full overview of both revenue for student programming as well as capital. Melissa comes and does the capital, and so that will all be captured. And so what I'll do is I'll timestamp that question for each of you. But I'll also pop open the books, it's tabbed, I just can't recall it, so I'll get it for you before you leave this evening. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so in terms of what does the Durham District School Board draw in terms of special education revenue from that base funding? You see amounts listed there for each of those 4 buckets. But Sharon, you set me up beautifully for the next slide. So important is, what is the context of change? Because numbers are relevant when they're positioned against current processes. So again, this is where Associate Director Wright has given permission to share part of the budget book publicly this evening, knowing it has not yet fully gone public in the system. So what we're showing there is a section of the budget book that shows you those 4 buckets of funding now coming in under the special education fund. And what you see is what we were estimating, and then what has increased or decreased in terms of if we took this year's funding and reattributed it to the new boxes and buckets, what would the change be? And you can see there that it's substantively different in terms of that. So to the question about equipment, a $1.2 million change for the district for the pure pupil amount, special education related, an uplift of $3.7 million in terms of funding into the district. And we are a district that's always funded above envelope. And so there's a little bit of right fitting because similar to Censor Renev's question of Stephanie, we know sometimes pinch off of teams such as our multi-language learners. And we can no longer do that in terms of that team needing to be really well supported. The teams work in consultation with each other, but some of that funding needed to go back to where we were drawing from. So this is our current revenue for the 24-25 school year. In the draft budget bill, and again, it is going public tomorrow, as a district, we have made a statement that you see on screen. That it is not increasing at the same rate as the demand for services. And I think that is not isolated to Durham, but we see kids' complexity of what they present in terms of programming and support needs changing over time. And so that it does put a financial pressure on the rest of the board. And that we do consider it a priority locally. And that's how that the gap will be addressed and is such within the draft budget. So I just wanted to share that, very relevant to the work of SEAC. And I thought, Tara, that might be something. So put that in there. In terms of the overall change, and this can get kind of complex to read, and again, it's coming right out of our draft budget book. So now we've gone from money into the district to how is the money being spent on students. So for inclusive student services, we have maintained that about 96 to 97% of the funding is staffing. Classroom support staff, school staff that support kids, and our department staff. And again, the vast majority of department staff are actually out in schools working, such as social work, psychological services, and the facilitator teams that Connor and Michelle lead. You see there, where there is red, I can explain that. So you see a negative of 120,000 under special education reserve. It is not rightful to have a reserve because it means that it was funds unused in a year for students. So SEAC has heard over the last few years that we did have $500,000 reserve that we have strategically slowly drawn down. The final draw from that was 120,000 in this year. So because there's a change of, we had that 120 this year and we don't have it next year, it actually shows as a negative, but it wasn't, it was in addition to, and we used it for staffing top up around transitions. And then others are just staffing adjustments. So where you see there, so you see the revenue increase by $7.8 million current year to next. You see the expenditures increase to $7.9 million this year to next. So significant contributions. And again, the budget all comes with the caveat that it is presented to the Board of Trustees for consideration. It is not in the purview of senior team to approve the budget. We draft in consultation with schools and our departments, but it is a governance and policy leadership component. So the trustees will be working through that between Monday and June board to create the balanced budget. This should be considered a draft at this point. Where does that extra dollars go? Because we just said that there is additional dollars coming into the district. We know a few things. So similar to Connor's comment, Allison, to your question around how do kids access and where. And so within the draft budget, there is a fairly substantive proposed increase to the number of educational assistants in the Durham District School Board for the 24-25 school year, and those are full-time permanent positions. And that is a large part of where the dollar's going. That is a large part of those dollars. I am not in a position tonight to release the number that is in the draft budget, but happy to follow up once it's public. We have an overall increase to the number of special education placement classes. So we've talked to you about that model of different class types. We do know and had communicated that over time, the school support program should really be phased out at a senior level of secondary, because kids can choose through pathways and courses and interests. And so we have moved a couple of those classes out of the system. Every single one of our secondaries does have a a school support program, and one of our schools in a priority area does still remain with two. So we did close out a couple classes, but we have added practical learning and developmental programs to the system, as well as a structured learning class to the system. So overall, in terms of the number of seats, our student spaces in special education placement classes, we are again increasing proportional to the needs that we're seeing in the district. We are proposed to introduce a senior speech pathologist position. This is a refiguring of one of our current positions, but adding a responsibility stipend. So currently, right now, speech is led by a senior manager and clinical lead. You met Lisa Drake earlier this year. Lisa did resign in terms of some other opportunities. Fatima Beauregard started with us last week, coming from York District School Board. But it is one leadership position with a very broad team of responsibilities, including speech paths, ASL interpreters. And so we are proposing, we have this model within our social work team, where there's a 3-year leadership secondment. We come out to schools 2 days a week to provide clinical guidance alongside the senior manager for the team that is in, as well as we've talked about the adjustment to the equipment and technology fund. So all of that is built into the draft budget in terms of where the money goes next year. That is the core funding. We have dollars called supports for students funding that are attached to the collective agreements. And so it is dollars for the lifespan of our current collective agreement. So for the next 2 years, there are 29 EA positions that carry through. We already have them in the system, and they are carrying through for the next 2 years. We have 8.3 elementary resource teachers. A couple of the new classes for special education are being funded through this. And then you saw Stephanie talked about primary resource teachers and well-being facilitators. That is also coming from this fund. And those are teachers focused within schools on supporting well-being, mental health, universal design, accommodations, and inclusion. Just trying out a couple new roles. The well-being facilitators are helping with the grade 7-8 mental health curriculum and the mental health component of the careers and civics course. So when we look as a system, careers and civics run for 55 days each. And we have teachers that will have brand new curriculum in September, and we have 55 days for the kids that have that section first. And so how are we supporting schools in addition to teaching and learning and guidance to have the learning to support the kids rightfully, because we know that no conversation about mental health is benign. And so just layering that in. And then we've talked also about project grants. And so these are separate envelopes for specific purposes. These are not all of them allocated to the Durham District School Board, but a sampling that are connected to special education, mental health. So you see the reading screening tools, which become mandatory for September. The staffing to support reading interventions. This year, the model that you had presented to you, where it was teacher and speech pathologist, because we took the definition of the word educator to those that teach others. This year's funding says teacher. Mental health strategy supports on emergent needs. We are subsidized to encourage educators to take special education additional qualifications courses. This is going into the third of 3 years of funding. This year, we matched it in district, and we expended over $50,000 in subsidies for really critical training for teachers, with a priority on those getting your qualifications to support kids who are deaf, blind, or deaf and blind. And then special education qualifications second to that. Transition coordinators, and then we see our summer supports both for learning and mental health, and those are listed there for you too. But those are separate and neat envelopes of funding. So that kind of gives you a very quick, I apologize for that, similar wording that Steph used, overview of the funding. So as a district, higher revenue next year than this year, but also higher number of students. And as Connor indicated, we also see that the pace of kids with complex needs is increasing faster than our quick enrollment pressure as a district as well. That isn't an even growth rate. And so the dollars will be well expended and fully expended in support of kids, but with the vast majority being directed right adjacent to the students, either with their educator teams in schools or the wraparound services. The next amount is the specialized equipment, and then we save a little bit to support professional learning, which since we're going to be running to the space, we do rightfully have a commitment to our own staff in terms of their professional development in service of kids. And so that would be the third amount, and that's basically the entire department budget in those three buckets. So happy to, happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot, I apologize for that. Sarah?
Could I get, the
No,
full, the full day, when it's available?
Send it right after
this. Yeah, could I get the numbers, like last year's total enrollments? And as well as I get last year's, total numbers of teacher TAs, like staff, for respective,
Yeah.
maybe.
Over to you, Sharon. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Elizabeth, did you have a question? I just have a comment that I'm disappointed about the change in the literacy team and the speech pathologists.
So what we're looking at, I hear you, because the feedback was quite amazing from classroom teams. As a family of schools team of superintendents this morning, we were talking around the feedback from students, watching non-readers become confident readers, and the comments from staff feeling that integrated support. And so our plan and what we're looking for right now is to not lose that momentum, but also not overtask individual speech pathologists, because support for educators has always been part of their role. We just had the advantage this year of peeling part of the team out and separate, focus specifically on literacy, while the others maintain their care loads and direct service. And so we're just looking at how we blend that back, because to do more of something, you've got to do less of something else. So we're just looking at that. We were both with the speech team this afternoon, looking at the augmentative communication. We talked a little bit about the literacy project, and we had piloted a central waitlist for assessments just as we jobbed what was happening as the contract SLPs took permanent jobs and what we needed to do to make adjustments gave us an opportunity. So we're trying to do the yes and of everything without draining. So we're working on it because I do think that integrated, collaborative, and they're communication experts. You have education experts and you have communication experts, and the magic was in the mix. So we're trying to figure out how not to lose that priority. So thank you. This is a qualified speech path. Sorry, just yeah. But thank you, because I think it was very impactful.
Allison and Kelly? My comment was just with respect to that statement. I'm really pleased to see that statement in which the board expresses concern about the widening gap between what's needed and what's they're able to provide. So I'm just wondering, who does that lobbying to the ministry? Does SEAC have a role in that? Who does that lobbying for money?
Yeah, we have written copious amounts of letters to the ministry with respect to special education funding. We've written letter after letter with respect to what was called the special incidents portion, which is now called the, is it, okay, special, which is basically the cost, the ministry will pay when a student needs more than one full-time, one-on-one.
Right.
For whatever the reason, however that may look like. And the true cost compared with the ministry will pay. And so we've written many letters with respect to that. We've written many letters with respect to the budgeting shortfall, the using of the outdated census data. Well, yeah, I mean,
It
and
is 3 years already outdated, but.
'Cause
It's better
yeah.
than.
yeah, I mean, 2006 compared to 2001, like it's night and day. I know I ran into one of the junior ministers under the Minister of Education who used to be a trustee at the school board, and I took my opportunity to say, hey, right? Because much of the way that the school boards are funded, in my opinion, can create systemic racism, right? Because regardless of special education funding, just in general, right? You've got schools that are required, to have the extra, schools are required to fundraise, right? So you've got schools who can fundraise 30,000-40,000 in a year, and you have a school who, I know there was one Oshawa raised $99. And generally, those lower income schools, those areas where parents can't provide the fundraising money, they can't buy the chocolate bars and magazines and all of those things, they're racialized, right? And then special education perspective, you take that sort of intersectionality between, kids who are racialized, and economically deprived as well. On top of that, you've got the way the school board is funded, so one school can't share with another. The education experience for the kid in school who can raise 40,000 in a school year compared to the kid who's going to school who can raise $99 is night and day.
Right.
So these are type of things that need to be addressed, and it's the special education funding, I mean, it's a human rights thing as well, right? When you're using, as I put it, you're using census data from 2006, you're intentionally underfunded,
Yes.
right?
I don't know how that was allowed to happen. How could that even have happened?
It's been happening since 2006.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would probably disrupt a little bit in that is, I wouldn't directly correlate, communities of lower socioeconomic status with individuals that have, different identities, because I don't think, when we look at where there has been, a dominant culture that has created marginalization, for families, there is in some places and it's not in others a direct correlation, and so I just wouldn't want to explicitly link those two.
Yeah,
Because I don't think that's what our demographic data.
Yeah, I just kind of, I tie that into even to a certain degree my own upbringing. Yes, I'm of a single parent growing up in, metro housing in Scarborough, right? And I
Family status.
see,
Identity through family status.
yeah, exactly, and so you sort of see that, right? When you take sort of different points of marginalization, you add them together, we create a bigger problem, right? And I guess that's my point with that, so, yeah, I guess that's sort of the long answer, like, we regularly write letters.
Usually write very stern.
Yeah.
Very lengthy, long.
And we often get back letters saying, thank you very much.
For your feedback, yes.
Yeah.
Well, if there's a letter writing subcommittee, I'll be on that.
I am always happy.
Yeah.
Somebody else willing to write letters. Because that's a fact, like we see funding for special education year over year shrink compared to the rate of inflation, right? And these are in many cases, some of our most vulnerable kids, right? So.
Anyway, thank you. And the only other resource that you'd be given is the ministry did put out a parent caregiver guide to the overview of special education funds. And so we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that resource in case you're supporting families with inquiries, and to point them towards an accessible resource on how a board's funded around special education.
Kelly, so, thank you. I just wanted to, in discussion with Donna previously, and you did mention, Andrea, about specialized support services in some context. So I was just wondering, me and Donna discussed this before, but she's not here to kind of speak on this, but I wanted to know if the bill, 60 Integrated Community Health Services Centers Act, how that might impact students that require these specialized external supports.
So interesting, I would have to look specific, I haven't done the, matching of that explicitly. I think what we're still, we haven't heard a lot about changes to
Right.
local integrated health networks. We kind of heard the announcement, and then we haven't heard a lot. We also know, and I kind of knock on wood each time I mention it, PPM water around healthcare in schools. Is that really old one, that was in draft and then pulled back. It's the one that says kind of the children's treatment centers do speech articulation therapy. We do educational access to communication needs in terms of speech. So right now, no changes. But I will take the question and I'll specifically sit with Pat and we'll do a side by side.
You're welcome. Just one thing to kind of call out on the one, so, it's been a project for me. Measure the variability of the moving through 4, 5, page 5, as the EQAO assessments. Just so people are aware that a student we basically, if they achieve a level 2, when there's 3 levels, level 3s, 4, there's 4 levels, if they achieve a level 2, funding is pulled for that student because they're good enough. So we've succeeded up to them at this point, and then we're gonna remove funding from the board because we've met an okay standard.
Where do you say, where's that?
That it's not in here, it's very whitewashed, this document. It's top of page 5, education quality and accountability office, the EQAO. Participation and achievement, it is actually one of the measures of variability. So in that predictive model about whether or not we get funding, if children do well enough, they remove funding. Well, the formula takes into consideration you achieve a level 2 now. So I'm just gonna kind of call that guy out to say it's one of those things that's what the ministry funding does. It says this is good enough for our kids.
Clarification on what you're saying. So that, are you regarding just for, is it funding towards EQAO assessment courses?
It's one of the factors in the measures of variability. So if you go back through the model to say how we actually get funded with the special education.
Use of the data, not funding for the test.
Yeah. Okay, basically gives us revenue into the warrants.
So they use the data to determine the funding and students.
One of the pieces, I mean, it's not to be all and all, obviously, there's many different things in there, but it's one of those things that just kind of calling that out, so.
Isn't a level 3 considered to be the base standard, like that's meeting expectations?
Level 3 is not Ontario standard.
So that's a good question as to why they're pulling funding at 2.
I still don't understand why that's okay, you say, well, with the funding that we've got, we're able to achieve X, let's just keep funding them, so we can achieve.
Where are you getting at? I don't see that here.
It's not in here, you actually have to go into the funding formula, you have to go to the technical. You have to read the eye-wateringly, mind-numbing funding formula to know that. You can ask Donna all about it, she knows.
Yeah.
It's been that way for years, but that one just always really bothers me.
So additional funding based on the low students who are not meeting the provincial standard. What you're saying is, can you make your statement again? I'm just
So-
not sure.
There's 4 levels, so level 2,
Yes.
level 3 is meeting Ontario standards.
Yes,
If a child that's been identified meets a level 2, then that is basically taken into consideration and we remove
the
funding.
potential to move, not that it's guaranteed that it's.
No, it's one of the factors that basically gives you a factor to say if you have children that meet level 2, then that funding will be removed, basically.
So the
you reduce
achievement-
funding.
The achievement of students in grade 3 and 6 on EQAO is a weighted factor that comes into the revenue calculation. So the district data, when we look at these factors, there's reference the measures of variability. So how is the variability between districts impacting funding? EQAO is a weighted factor. And that's where that discrepancy comes in based on scores.
Essentially, if kids do okay on the EQAOs, that weighted factor reduces our funding.
Even though they're not meeting provincial standards.
Even though it's, when level 3 is considered meeting Ontario standards, curriculum standards. So kids identified with an IEP, special needs, are basically, you penalize them for somewhat achieving things.
Yeah, it's just looking at the technical paper, the prevalence of students with special education needs. So I'd have to get Jen to do the behind it, it may not be based on the Tara, maybe, it may be the number versus the achievement of.
Okay. It's one of those things that it sounds like it's a great thing, but if you look at the actual formula, it's not as great as I'd like it to be.
It's reading as numbers.
Yeah.
So the plan usually is that SEAC does do a deputation to education finance. A little bit behind the scenes, Tara has agreed to present on behalf of SEAC, and we probably want to ask if there's any highlights to it.
Yep. Would anybody like to provide me some details that they would like to highlight?
When are we gonna do this?
Pardon?
When?
Monday.
Monday.
I probably have to go to the debt tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will help you who to present it to,
A finance committee.
which is the board of trustees.
Got it.
So no rush.
It's always a time crunch.
Yeah.
I have the draft up right now.
Do you want to circulate it by using that's what I can do it. Okay. I will look at
That's good.
So does anybody have anything that they would like Tara to speak to on Monday with respect to the presentation? Yeah, but it like has to be done.
Tomorrow.
Right.
Or tonight, preferably, that would be great. For me, the things that I am gonna be highlighting is yay, 2021 census data. Do we know which portions of the spending funding is now actually taking? Yes, it's in the tip. I was gonna highlight that. The other piece that we saw, I'm assuming that, so for Huzzah, we're still doing an increase in we have the proposed increase for EAs. Yes, so no, I usually always go some check marks, like some good stuff, we do have some good stuff that happens. And then, but then just sort of overall, like, again, echoing the statement of the board of directors, just saying it's just never enough. Right, so maybe you can look at that with the number of staff, I think 900-ish for the entire system. When we have several thousand, tens of thousands of students who are identified. Do the math. I think there's just not enough. Zero, right? And what is 97% of this budget just goes to staffing costs and pension and on all of that, just to afford the people that we do have.
This deficit that we run by, I added those numbers together.
Which one, sorry?
Are those, that's my numbers, right? The ones that are on page 16, special education fund revenue. The last line on the budget.
Yeah.
Those are the deficits that we're running, is that correct? Yes, no. on page 16.
Oh. Page 15. The slide 15, special education fund revenue.
Oh, mine hasn't, okay, 15, yes, page 8. Slide 15,
Slide 15.
yes.
That is the increase that has come in for next year over this year, based on the 4 budgets.
The increase that's coming.
Correct. If they were decreases, they would be, our team is
Minuses.
really like, yeah, they use black and red fonts as outset and deficit. Those are increases over current. If you flip over to slide 17,
Yes,
the numbers in the bottom that are red are the differentials in what the trustees have additionally funded over the last 4 years, kind of over 2. And then this year it is showing, only because the reds are showing, a little bit down, but we're actually not already up. If you look at the bolded numbers, those are the important ones in terms of the $7.8 million in revenue and the $7.9 million additional in expenditure. That's the change, not the sum total, but the change. It's large, so we're set to the number that is the total expenditure planned for next year, not including the project grants, is the 147,298 million. Like that's the department budget for next year.
okay,
So just shy of 2.7 million.
just shy.
So in terms of revenue versus expenditure.
Okay, these just shies, are those regulars within these giant budgets? Like, it seems like a big number for me, but like, what
I
are
was
you thinking of
treated,
the large
yeah,
budget?
so for me, any amount is an important amount, because
Yeah.
usually what we do is, for us, they're role equivalencies. So anything more than, like 5-digit numbers are still role equivalencies in terms of service to students. So we watch and individuals, like Lisa, help us immensely with watching the budget through the year. Because they're the students' dollars that we're stewards of. But these numbers in terms of the overall department, relative, but for us, we drill down to every line, because I really do feel like they're the kids, it's the kids' money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Tara, the only reason why I run around with them is that when you say we're just shy, that's like being 50 cents short at the cash register, looking at the person behind you and saying you got a nickel, take a penny, give a penny. And I want us to use stronger language that.
Oh, no, I meant we're just shy of 2.7 million.
Okay.
That's what I mean, yeah. So the deficit that we, the deficit that we're running, the differential between the money that we got in and the money that we are planning on spending is 2.7. So we propped up what we.
From other areas.
From
of the
other
district.
areas
Yeah.
of the budget, the non-enveloped funding.
Correct.
We poured into our special education funding.
This has been an area of interest for me, so like if I could come to a motion to support you and be a fly on.
Oh, I would totally take every view, emotional and moral support, please.
Can you send me the?
Yeah, it would be here.
7 p.m. in the boardroom. It's also
fancy
live streamed.
In the fancy room.
Whichever is most convenient to you. It's cool.
They're all comforting.
I think I'm just gonna come because I want to give her some support. She always does a person. Tara always does a person.
This was a little rushed. That's okay.
So these
thank you
budget
for that live
only
stream.
takes care of children who are currently identified and are currently in the system. So any new students that come into the system after that budget, where does that money come from? So students who get identified throughout the year, is that taken, is that?
Correct, so there's 2 points in the year that we do kind of a true up, and do revised estimates, which means that we can. And so the 2 reporting dates that are key for districts are October 31st and March 31st. So we can't do it on an ongoing basis, but at those 2 points in time, there is a snapshot taken within the district. But we built this based on our expected enrollment at this time. So there is a true up. So if boards over project their enrollment, then there's a penalty financially, that there's a clawback. But there is an adjustment fall point, for that, which also gets into the question right after the halfway period is not a rush to identify. But often schools and families will say, is it attached to funding? No. And so just making sure that we're moving processes in pace with what's best for the child, and then we figure out the rest. But no, there's a couple points of true up.
Okay,
Yeah, that's really sort of, and then our usual, thank you for actually that 2.7 million extra, because we need every penny of it, and wish we didn't have to. It is unfortunately, because again, back to we're taking it from somewhere else in the system to support our students.
Do we also bring up the transportation issue that we just brought up a lot?
We can, and we usually do, and I'll probably very poorly paraphrase, this is one of Donna's very favorite subjects as well, is, transportation is a separate envelope from the envelope, right? No, it's one of the core funds.
No, it's one of the
core funds. It's a separate bucket of money than special education. However, our special education students take far majority of our students take way more advantage and need the transportation than the rest of the system does. So it's this really strange formula that's happening because we're still using transportation, but it's over here, and we're not really, but again, it's for that to be, but it becomes, part of accessibility. And you're right, in order for children to get to school, we should have it more focused to say, these kids really, really need this. We shouldn't be trying to make the system work for everybody, because we have higher needs, we have, specialized needs. I think, what was it last year, there was the elimination of taxis and.
Oh, the defunding of.
The defunding of taxis and things like that, which worked for a lot of kids, or where you can't get a big bus, you can't get a short bus because rural environment, or, that student just can't make it on a bus, like they physically, emotionally cannot make it on a bus, I need to go in a taxi because that's the only thing I can do. And so we eliminated pathways for them to get to school with that, and so it's one of those, so now what?
So we don't know, transportation
Is another
we don't know if that current budget supports the current needs that we have right now for students.
It never That's the problem.
We build it into our staffing models as much as we can in terms of the projections for special education classes and resource teachers. One of our conversations around team planning is, as we adjust classes in the fall, what other supports does increased enrollment need in terms of clerical, custodial, regulated health, classroom support? It is an unprotected science. You are correct, it is a gap that we're planning based on. Not information.
So, can I ask another question? You mentioned, Andrea, about that there was gonna be remaining, special education classes in secondary, 6, I think you mentioned.
So what it is the, so within the model of special education classes, we have those that are intensive supports and alternate curriculum, like developmental. The school support program, so it has 10 students in it at elementary, 12 at secondary. It was really introduced for students that needed intensive literacy skills, and largely with D3. And if we get universal design for learning really going properly at elementary, the model kind of does itself out of the system. And when we were looking, so where students can take that intensively to come alongside the support of grade 9, 10, by the time we get to 11 and 12, what the kids are expressing is they really want to be in their courses of interest and pathway. And so for a principal, it's really hard to schedule a course that meets all of the different kids' pathways. And because the class sizes tend to come down as we get into those high interests, what the kids were looking for is actually available within the regular class placement. And so we've done kind of it was never meant to be a fully kind of junior grade through grade 12 part of the model. As we look at them, so there's only a couple of them that have closed for next year, and it's schools that still have 2, which really amplified a pathway rather than an intervention. And that program is meant as an intervention, whereas developmental and a couple of the others are more pathway. This one had kind of morphed into it without the intention of it being so. So just a couple of schools, but it didn't remove it from any.
And then elementary, they're maintaining.
Within the family of schools model, so in priority areas, GL family of schools, Rock family of schools, each of the schools has a school support program because there tends not to be the community resources. Within the other sections of the district, it is 1 or 2 within a family of schools for all, and then it's a regional class. And so the team does the balancing on who needs access, but it does sometimes when kids are moving schools in order to access.
And then back to transportation.
Yes.
Rock that back.
So that's a decrease over time. Just for that type of class, but our others overall, I can't recall a year that we were less than what we were the year before. We've steadily increased, but it's that delicate balance in the model. And as Connor said, the research is really clear that if we can stay regular class and have our accommodation inclusion needs met, that really keeps the greatest number of pathways and options open for kids. It is the most inclusive and least restrictive. But then we do know that we do have students that require that differentiated support. That is a great developmental program, is a great example of that. So it's just balancing within the model. But we remain a board at this time committed to many options for kids. Some districts have closed out all their special education classes. We have not been in any of those discussions locally. We still feel that at this time, as we continue to build that universal design and accommodation, we're not there yet in terms of being able to support without a differentiated structure.
Any other questions? If you have anything you'd like to have added to the deck for Tara, please email her tomorrow, by tomorrow. Okay?
I'll have a draft that you guys can feel. It's what I have already, and it takes some data, and it's not gonna be much different from last year. I've been looking at our new transfer students that they have to update them, so it's gonna take a little longer. All right, I will do that.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna move on then to the board reports with Kelly. All right, happy to provide, bring some good news from the board. The DDSB received funding for 3 new elementary schools. The Ministry of Education has granted the funding to construct 3 elementary schools, a significant investment that will address accommodation pressures and ensure accessible, high-quality education for all students. 2 of these new schools will be situated in Whitby, with locations at Maxwell Crescent and Coronation Road, Cisco Drive, and Limoges Street, respectively. The 3rd school will be situated in Oshawa, located at Symington Avenue and Steeplechase Street. Each of these schools will accommodate 634 pupil spaces, supporting the growing needs within the district. These new schools will not only support our commitment to providing accessible education, but also underscore our dedication to creating spaces where all students can thrive. And on that note, I want to add to the point about transportation. Some of the idea that the build of the new schools will help with some of the transportation issues, just because that will reduce some of that transportation, having those new school builds. So that's good news. Okay, and then moving on to some events coming up. We have on June 4th and June 18th, the DDSB will be hosting the Living Compendium event. It is an evening to review and discuss the compendium of action for Black students. You're welcome to register. So on June 4th, there is, it's going to be held at Da Vinci Public School. I think that's 6:30. And I will follow up if anyone needs more information. And June 18th in Port Perry, in one of the Port Perry schools. I can always follow up with some more information for the details on that and how to register. And that's it for the board report. Any questions with respect to the board report? Okay, moving on to the draft summary of the SEAC obligations and expectations. Just given timing, because we're already running late. My recommendation is that we go through this and make any comments or changes we think is important and send those changes to Lisa. And that'll be incorporated for the draft.
This was in response to our conversations around the handbook for bylaws and then showing the suggestion around in terms of reference. If we do terms of reference, the purview for approval rests with the Board of Trustees. So it was suggested around obligations and expectations, just documenting our processes so that it remained at this table's determination.
Any questions with respect to that? No? Okay, moving on then to the business arising from the minutes, the engagement and advocacy event. If we're gonna hold this event, I really need to get a subcommittee together. I don't know if, virtual, like we could do virtual meetings, if that would make it easier for people to participate in or wanna get involved in. But we need to really do some actual planning if we're gonna put this event together, because, we don't want it to be something that's kind of, somewhat thrown together. We want it to be polished and professional. And also, just so you're aware, we had talked about putting on a parent engagement night with regard to advocacy and student advocacy. And we were looking at, I can't recall what date we were looking at. October 1st of next year. But obviously, much of the planning will have to happen between now and September if we're gonna put that on. So, yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
And when you finish, I want to just give a suggestion for getting the next meeting set up.
Yeah.
We could probably just try and send out a doodle poll, maybe have dates from our previous conversation suggested in the spring, and maybe just get a doodle poll to see which couple dates might work best for everyone.
Yeah, okay,
So that way it makes it official that yes, I'm going to send.
we can do that, okay. So, yeah, we'll put together a Google poll.
Online meetings are definitely easier to
Yeah,
attend.
I think so too, yeah. It'll allow, I think, more people to get involved in the actual planning, right? So, okay.
Doesn't it sound?
Is this event in conjunction with something else that's happening at the same time, or is it
No, it's
just
just
completely
us,
on
it's
its
just SEAC event. So one of the things we've been trying to do over the last number of years is make people aware of our existence, right, in the community. Because we sit around this table representing many fantastic associations that can assist parents with advocacy and, and just, not just with advocacy, but with supports and information and things like that. So we've been trying very hard to sort of make more and more people aware of us and what we do. So some of the ways to do that is to actually put on some events. During COVID, we did put on an event with respect to caregiver fatigue. And that was done to virtual dates, and that was fairly well attended, right? Yeah. So, and we were sort of thinking about doing this, especially, IEPs and stuff like that.
If you're looking for names of interested subcommittee people, I'd be happy to be involved in that.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, that would be fantastic. Okay, any other questions or comments with respect to that? Okay, so moving on to the association and committee reports. I was gonna present tonight on the Association for Bright Children because one of the things we've been doing, Allison, is taking turns talking about our different associations and what they do, what they represent. So I agreed to take on tonight. As you know, I sit for the Association for Bright Children, which is an all-volunteer provincially incorporated registered charity with many chapters across the province. And it's dedicated to providing advocacy and support for parents of bright and gifted children and adolescents, and it offers parent voice to local school boards, to SEACs, educators, professional groups, and the Ontario Ministry of Education. So the Association for Bright Children has a bit of a different definition for gifted than the ministry has, right? And they sort of define it as asynchronous development characterized by measurable advanced intellectual abilities accompanied by any or a combination of the following: heightened intensity, strong emotional reactions. They tend to feel things very deeply. Most teachers who teach them will tell you that. Exceptional creativity, very much think outside of the box kind of thinkers. Persistent intellectual curiosity, they question everything. Rapid acquisition and mastery of concepts. They very much dislike repetition. Superior reasoning and problem solving skills, they understand, which is understanding concepts sort of far on their years. And leadership capacity, many of them like to take on responsibility. For the potential for advanced achievement and of a specific domain or general academic aptitude. So they often have areas of learning or talents that stand out. And which require, and all of these which require interventions beyond those available in a regular classroom. It is important to note that the giftedness can occur across all demographics and in combinations with physical and neurodiversity. In other words, pretty much every association at this table is at this table. Your kids are in the gifted. We have your kids in the gifted program. It is really important to note the gifted kids. And one of the things I try to do, because there's a lot of misconceptions around the gifted program and the gifted kids and why it's important. And one of the first questions I like to ask people is, why do you think it's important, right? And if they think it's academics, I know they don't really understand it, because they're going to be bright, whether they're in a mainstream classroom or not. These kids are who they are. For them, it's the emotional and social advantage of being with their peers, because many of these kids stand out in the classroom, right? They're 2%, right? So 2 out of 100 kids may be gifted. So maybe in a grade 3 class you've got, or a grade 3 stream, you might have 1 or 2 kids in that stream that are gifted, and they may or may not be in the same class. And even if they are, personality-wise, they may or may not be friends, right? And for many of these kids, they often end up feeling like they're on the outside looking in, because they talk differently, they think differently, they act differently. So for many of these kids, it's that social piece, that sort of friends piece that matters the most for them. And I know, and it's not true for all gifted kids. I know I had one who socially needed a gifted program because she was that odd person out looking in, and the other one who adapted herself to fit in with her peers and didn't have that same social thing. But really actually bloomed much more in her interest in things once she got in with people with kids who were also gifted. So that was always very interesting for me to watch, even with my own kids. It's also very important to note that gifted kids are not necessarily gifted in all areas, right? So you might have a kid who's gifted in math and science, but not language, or in art and language and not in math. And so they're all very unique, different children as well. Gifted kids have asynchronous development. So they may be a 6-year-old reading at the level of a 12-year-old, but emotionally and maturity-wise, they're a 6-year-old, right? So you might have 1 minute you're having a conversation with your child about, I don't know, some sort of very advanced math thing, and the next minute they're having a meltdown because you gave them the wrong colored cup, right? Just like any younger child. 20% of all gifted kids, and considering they're 2% of the population, 20% of all gifted kids have an alternate education. Autism, ADHD, generalized anxiety disorder are at the very top of that list. But they're all the other learning disorders are in as well, dysgraphia, et cetera, dyslexia, they're all kind of combined in with these kids. So one of the big conceptions is that they all do well academically, which is actually not necessarily true. Sometimes they need that intervention and supports, right? So the misconception is gifted kids don't need support, but gifted kids many kids do need support, and needing support doesn't mean they're not gifted. It just means they have a learning disability or an alternate identification. And like I said, having that within our gifted program is partly why you see that I will advocate very fiercely for all children with all learning differences, right? And I guess the thing that it struck me because there was often a lot of questions about why this program is so important. And I was actually recently, I was very fortunate to be asked to be part of a PD session recently for teachers for the gifted program. And it was a fantastic opportunity. But I was asked by one of the teachers at one of the schools why, we integrate kids who are maybe below grade level, right, into a mainstream classroom, and why is it that we have a separate program for gifted learners, right? Big question. People are why, and this was my answer. And I said, when my kids were in elementary school, there was a young child in the primary grade at the time with Down syndrome. And the peers in that classroom wrapped themselves around that child and were very fiercely protective of that child with those special education needs. Unfortunately for gifted kids, that doesn't happen for them, right? So they don't have that cocoon of support from the rest of their classmates. They are often end up on the outside looking in. Their classmates often see them as geeks or weird. They don't often have interests that the other classmates can relate to. So they end up often without those interventions and supports and being with people who think like them, talk like them, and act like them, they end up disengaging from school. And statistically, we know that gifted kids who don't get that sort of intervention are either a higher chance of underachieving or completely disengaging from school and often leaving school early as a result. So it's, even though you would think you're saying, well, you've got this group integrated, this is kind of like apples to apples, it's not, because the understanding of the needs are very, in a classroom amongst their peers is very different, right? So for many of these kids, when they walk into the gifted program for the first time, it's the first opportunity where they feel like they actually belong and they have friends. And I know that was very much true for my older daughter. As I said to this one teacher, she spent her recesses alone, except for the last recess. This was in grade 3, when her friend, who was a year older, would get home from school from the gifted program, and her fence backed onto the schoolyard. And her friend would meet her at the fence, and they would talk for the last recess. And that was her life from about grade 2 till she moved. So that's why when we talk about the gifted program and why it's so important, that's why it's important. It's not really the academic. The academic is great and fantastic for these kids, and they thrive, and they are somewhat scary in a room together. But it's more the social emotional side for them and having people that they can relate to within their classroom. So if you have any questions on that, or want to learn more about it, I'm happy to have those conversations, because to me, this program is more about that than it is about the academic side. So
do you feel this is more work that teachers need to do in order to include students who are gifted within their classroom? It's a social emotional piece.
It's very difficult, simply because it's that sort of mindset, well, this kid's okay, I mean, they get it academically, right? So you've got a teacher in a mainstream classroom teaching, in a sense, kind of 3 grade levels in one, right? You've got children who are below grade level, children at grade level, maybe 1 or 2 above. And who, with those needs within a classroom and only so much teacher energy to go around per student, you need to try and lift those kids who are below level up as best you can, right? So often, the gifted kids become, in a sense, like an EA. You know, oh, you're finished, why don't you help so-and-so, right? And that can create its own set of issues for that child as well, right? Because, so I think it's very difficult for a teacher to accommodate one child or two children maybe in a classroom who are above grade level compared to it is to accommodate, you know, where the focus are. So it's a complicated situation, but for many of these kids, you know, they're going through, say, a math problem. They've gotten, one of the things the gifted program we've said is a much quicker pace. They don't have the same repetition, right? Whereas in a mainstream class, they have to make sure all the kids are there, right? When the sort of the testing comes. So you often end up with behavior issues from gifted kids in a mainstream class. They will get bored. So they're finished their work, you know, they've done their math sheet because they've done this, you know, fractions, you know, this is the second week in a row. So they've done it in 5 minutes and now they're bored. So they're looking to entertain themselves. And sometimes that comes out as disruption. But the disengagement piece is very real because I will go back to my own personal experience with my oldest one, who was very, very excited to start kindergarten. Hopped in, you know, sort of skipped to the schoolyard first day of school and was, I can't believe I'm really here. I'm actually here. She was so excited. By Christmas, she was reading all the books in the classroom. She was trying to write phonetically. And they were learning their letters and their sounds, and she knew them all, right? And she knew them before she got there. By Christmas, and I'll never forget this because we're driving in the car and she's like, I don't see the point in going to school. It's not like I'm learning anything. And it was like, that was junior kindergarten, right? So then when you get to, you know, it was one of the reasons I chose French immersion. It was like, okay, this kid needs a challenge, right? So, and it's a tough situation. So yeah, it makes it difficult. Yeah, any other questions with respect to that?
You anticipate with de-streaming, that will be problematic once.
So it's considered a spec ed class, right? A special education, support special education envelope, right? A special education class. It's funded a bit different, but they have maximum 25 kids as opposed to 6, right? So it's a program, much like any of the other class placements are a program. So in high school, it's a bit different. Because in elementary school, it is a self-contained class placement, right? In a high school, it is sort of partial integration. The core courses, English, math, history, geography, science, those are all offered as a gifted level. You have to have an IEP with a gifted identification to be in those classes, right? But the rest of the classes are integrated, right? It's all the same ones. So it's already kind of streamed. It's not really, I guess you really wouldn't call it a stream because it's actually a class placement as opposed to a stream. So
The impacts of de-streaming if I'm not in the gifted program. And I
yes,
just every 9 or 10 course,
yeah,
because there's going to be a larger breadth of learner styles within the classroom. And so definitely something to keep an eye on because it's outside of the formal schools.
that's right.
Gifted learners exist in both programming and non-programming. So
Yeah.
Yes.
See that, I think this table has heard that a year ago, my son was in that position of trying to decide which high school to go to, was in the gifted program. But he really wanted to be in his community and meeting with the kids and was interested. That we figured out for grade 9, and I would say that the idea of going into a mainstream, de-streamed classroom was one of the factors that helped him to make the decision to stay.
was quite worried about what that change would look like. And if it had been, if there hadn't been streaming, we may have been more.
So anyway, I hope that helps sort of understand the program a little bit more and why we sit at this table. Part of the reason why the Association for Our Children is at this table, because it is an exceptionality, right? So, okay, so moving on quickly to correspondence. The only piece of correspondence was our letter from Easter Seals, which we were able, the board was able to approve before the meeting, and fortunately, we have Allison at the table today. And that's, letter from, is this what you had sent us? Oh, this was the guide. Okay, this is what we talked about earlier, the Ministry of Education guide. Any community concerns at this time to bring up? Does anybody have any community concerns at this time to bring up? No? Okay, celebrations and successes?
I'm sure Adam's story if you want.
Okay. We always like that.
Yes, so Adam is participating in baseball again this year. And he is without a doubt their best cheerleader. But when the kids are struggling at the plate, we'll just say that. But whenever they do get on base, Adam's like, yeah, go, and the finger guns come out right at whoever it is, and they're just losing. They love it. So yeah, that's Adam's superpower is the world's greatest cheerleader. So that is. He loves it. It's so funny, and everyone else loves to see it. So it's pretty good. So that's the Adam story this month.
My son's graduating from elementary to high school at the end of this month.
That's exciting.
Kind of overwhelming, screaming and all of that, but yeah, and unfortunately, it's on the night of the next SEAC meeting, so I won't be.
Well, you know what?
That's important. That's the
Your
best.
son graduates very important. You know,
Last year too.
yeah. Hopefully years following it won't be the case because of moving the SEAC meetings to the first Thursday of the month, right? So, but congratulations to your son.
Thank you.
And on to the next chapter, which don't blink because you'll miss it, because 4 years seems like a long time and it is not. Yes. Okay, our next SEAC meeting is June 20th, right here. Motion for adjourn. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Tara and Elizabeth.